Buenas tardes. Después de esta excelente
Good
mesa
afternoon and
redonda
welcome
de
back. I hope you
los
agree with me.
alumnos y
That was an
alumnas,
absolutely
que
excellent
como nos han
roundtable
dicho, el cambio está en nuestras
panel
manos.
with
Yo
the
creo que ese puede
secondary
ser el
school
mensaje.
students.
Eso nos
The basic
decía
message
Clara.
is that
Vamos a continuar
change is in their
con
hands, as we heard
esta
from Clara.
presentación
And now we're ready to start with the next block, with the continuation of a presentation that we started to hear about this morning from the Social Services Center Family Futures. Let me tell you that I've only just met them personally. I'm talking about Alan Burnell and Jean Mohan from the UK. And I must say that we've had immediate chemistry. That's my opinion, at least. They work with adopted children in their case, and I was telling Alan that I adopted an African child, a boy, and not only that, I am a pediatrician and I specialize in endocrinology, and we found the connection straight away. There's neurobiology and involved in these situations, and that is in turn in charge of changing our psychology, our behavior. It's all interconnected. This is what we were chatting about, how we need to be able to connect the micro level within this closer environment, the macro level, and so on. So this is why it's a particularly special pleasure for me to be here to introduce you again to them. They're going to show us some videos with real situations. Thank you very much for that.
This morning when Alan covered a lot of the theory about the work we do at Family Futures and the children we see. So really this afternoon I'm going to be telling you a story, more of the story about the little girl called Maisie. And this all links to our topic that violence against women is violence against children, born and unborn. So on the website, which we'll give you the details of at the end of this PowerPoint, is information about our therapy model. So I'm not going to cover that now, but it is important to be thinking about the different levels of the brain, and there's different ways of intervening at each level of the brain. So the slides for this bit is on the website, and will be the PowerPoint for both presentations will be there. So if you're interested, there's also our research articles and other articles on the trauma model. So I'm not going to cover that now, and I'm sure you're aware in a short presentation there's only so much that I can cover, and I'm not going to be able to even show you the whole of this video, which is an hour-long television program by the BBC. So I'm just showing you snippets of the program, so I'm afraid it doesn't even cover the whole therapy model, but I'll explain as I go along. So this is the story of Maisie, who's the youngest of 4 children. The birth father in this family was violent to Maisie's mother and to the children, and I mean extremely violent. It was extreme violence, and they saw some terrible things, and they had some terrible violence inflicted on them as children. There was also a transgenerational history of trauma. So the birth parents had had violence that they had witnessed and violence they had experienced themselves, and then they went on to replay that, to reenact that on their children. And then those children end up being removed. So that's very relevant to our way of thinking, that you can see this history being played out generation after generation, that what has happened to you, you enact to your own children, unless you've had help to think it through. So Maisie was 4 years old. That's 4 years of trauma before she was finally removed. The local authority was aware. They were visiting, but no one realized or was able to intervene early enough, because 4 years of this is a terrible, terrible long time for any child to experience. She then, as I said earlier, went into foster care. She was very violent to people in foster care, and I mean to the foster parents, so not just to other children, but to the foster parents. So she kept moving foster homes, which we see happening a great deal. Then you saw the rather strange thing that happens, not just in England, of an advert the local authority devises to advertise the child, or a little snippet of video to try and attract parents to take the child. And two parents, Sue and Jim, came forward and said they would take her. What happened, how we became involved, is that these parents had adopted a lot of children before, and they thought they could manage Maisie. They thought she was going to be no problem because they knew what they were doing. But what happened was in the first 6 months, they realized they were out of their depth, and they weren't coping with Maisie, and they didn't know how to manage her violence. So we were asked to get involved, and they had already agreed that they would be filmed on their journey through placement. I think they agreed to the filming because they believed they could manage this, and then it all became more difficult. And it's not meant as any disrespect for these parents. They are very, very able parents, and they were doing a really good job. But Maisie's violence, because of the violence she'd experienced, was so profound that they hadn't expected how that was really going to undermine their confidence as parents, and how the violence would be targeted on the prospective adoptive mother, Sue. It wasn't violence towards the dad, interestingly, which I think is significant. It was violence towards the adoptive mother, that Maisie was enacting what her experiences were and what she witnessed happening to her birth mother on her now adoptive mother. And this is what she'd done in foster care as well. So this is the first little snippet of video, and this is Maisie talking about, to the BBC first of all, before we're involved, about why she wants therapy and about the violence that she's inflicting on her prospective adoptive mother. Excuse me, lost the cursor.
What Mum knows help therapy, like get rid of all the bad stuff what's happened to me and talk about it and get rid of it, and help me trust my mum and dad more. Because I've pulled Mum's head, slapped her around the face, kicked her, punched her, and pinched her on the arm, and then I felt bad after that. So yeah, that'll help my life out.
Okay, so that's Maisie talking about that she wants therapy to help her deal with the things that have happened, the bad things that have happened to her, but then very able to be eloquent and very calm when talking about how violent she is being in that moment to her mother, adoptive mother, to Sue. And it's hard to believe how rageful she can be when she's being so calm there. But she was indeed being extremely violent. Adoptive mother was covered in bruises and cuts from the attacks she'd been receiving from Maisie. The first stage of therapy was really helping support the parents in understanding why Maisie was being like this, helping them with the fact they felt very ashamed that they weren't coping with her, that they didn't understand why, as experienced adopters, they weren't able to manage that degree of violence, and to come up with new strategies as to how to help Maisie. And a lot of the times you could see the stress building up in her body. She would get very angry and agitated, and finding ways to help them diffuse that stress. So rather than getting into a confrontation with her, finding physical things they could do, ways of actually easing things at home so they weren't constantly getting into conflict, because Maisie would set up a conflict as often as she could. So they worked hard at calming things down, and things were improving, but there were still difficulties, and she was just still very angry and distressed little girl, and nobody had talked to her. So she's got to 8 years old, and no one had talked to her about anything that had happened in her life, which is pretty unthinkable. She'd had all these terrible things happen. She'd had all these moves of home, but no one had talked to her. So the next video you're going to see is one of an earlier, after we'd done some work on really helping her be calm and helping the family manage, a bit of video where we talk about the loss of her foster mother, Susan. Now, Susan was the only foster parent she was with for any substantial time, so the only one that was able to manage. She managed a year, and then unfortunately she got very sick. And you'll see over the course of the next two videos, no one had talked to Maisie about the fact that it wasn't her fault that Susan got sick. It was just that Susan got sick, because Maisie had taken the view that actually it was her fault, that she'd been such a violent, bad little girl that this foster mum who'd managed her for a year didn't want her. So as that hadn't been untangled, the next 2 little clips of video, you'll see her focusing on that.
So Maisie, how long have you been in this family now that you're making all this food for? More than a year. But it looks to me as if both your mum and dad are clearly saying that they're happy.
Probably not.
Probably not. You say these little jokes, these little things, but I'm not sure that you always feel absolutely confident that things are all fine and that you are loved and that you are lovable. Is it a bit like the joy's gone out of the shopping? Because what I was wondering about, Maisie, is actually, you've had lots of mums before, haven't you? Maisie's feeling very cross with me because I'm bringing up this now.
Someone always butts in the game.
Yeah, you're making me feel a bit cross with me. And then you think maybe you'll be on your own for a bit. Maybe, Maisie, I'm sure you're listening over there.
No, I'm not.
Okay, well, you don't have to listen, because I'm just going to talk to your mum and dad for a little bit, because this is hard, really hard stuff to think about.
Just so don't talk to me.
To you? No, okay. And part of the difficulty is it's not really about you, Sue. It's about all the mummies before.
I think it is about all the mummies before. All of those hard feelings and all of that rejection.
I think when she says little things like, no, they don't really love me, that's really what's going on.
Yeah, and she said this last Friday, but nothing is changing. I'm still as angry, and I'm always going to have booms, and it's always going to go wrong.
No, I don't think leaving the room's okay. Do you want to go to the loo? Want to join her in the loo?
Don't touch!
She was resistant up to a point, but in the afternoon session, she was willing to explore a little bit further.
Maisie's a very good drawer and she likes getting things just so.
She does.
The therapists know all about Maisie's past through her records. Jay's persuading her to start thinking about what happened to her by getting her to draw her most recent mummies and daddies.
She ended up doing a picture with Jim on one side as a teddy bear and me on the other side as a giraffe. And that was the mummy and daddy that she felt was easy for her to think about.
Yeah, I like that.
That's brilliant.
Actually,
Susan. And then she also managed to put one of her foster carers onto the picture.
Why is she a star?
Because she was really, really kind to me.
She was really kind to you.
And we used to go outside watching the stars.
Ah, right.
Susan.
That's a good thought.
Susan, the star.
She seemed to be on a roll, but she's a difficult mummy to think about because, again, she let her go and didn't keep her.
Oh, you look a bit sad now. Is that something maybe you'd have liked, Maisie?
She was coping with me,
She was coping with
but
you.
then they just decided that she weren't right and took me away.
That makes you feel cross.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really sorry that happened for you, Maisie.
She was really nice.
I live with Fuven. I love Fuven. And Fuven's just behind you.
2 years ago, Maisie's last foster mum, Susan, helped her make this video to appeal to potential adopters.
I like to dance and I like to talk. A lot. And food time.
Susan was only ever meant to be a stopgap mum. But Maisie lived with her for over a year, enough time to form a strong attachment, probably the most reliable relationship Maisie has had in her whole life.
You can't have Susan back, sweetie.
A few days after the session, therapy seems to have triggered big feelings in Maisie. At home, they flood to the surface in a major tantrum.
You can't have Susan back.
It becomes clear Maisie doesn't understand why she couldn't stay with Susan forever.
No option. You can sit on the stair. You can't have Susan back, sweetie.
It takes an hour for Sue to calm Maisie down.
I need to get you fed, miss.
Two hours later, she's ready to talk about it.
I was really, really upset.
Did you live with her for a long time, Maisie?
I don't really know. It felt to be really long. Every Friday I got to choose what I wanted for lunch and dinner.
Okay, so we often start with foster parents first when we're trying to make sense of a child's story with them, because although it's painful thinking about Susan, it's not as painful as thinking about what happened in the birth family. But what was clear for Maisie was that she didn't understand why she wasn't living with Susan anymore, and she still wanted Susan back. And as I said, no one had talked to her about what happened. Now, sometimes talking isn't the only way, so in this way you're going to see a little bit of a puppet show. I should mention that there's not just me as therapist in the room. There's someone called Eugene Ellis and Elizabeth Wickham also in the video. So those are the other adults you're seeing in the room.
Jay wants to help Maisie understand why she couldn't stay with Susan.
Very good. Beautiful.
Right. I need you to choose me. Figure to be Susan.
Susan was cuddly.
Lovely.
To make it simple, Jay tries using puppets to act out what happened.
I'll look
Bye-bye.
after Maisie till you find a forever family.
Okay,
for her.
give us a call if you have any problems.
And then one day a terrible thing happens. Susan collapses and she gets sick, really sick, and has to go to the hospital as an emergency.
The team know that Maisie saw Susan rushed away in an ambulance and that she had no chance to say a proper goodbye.
And that was really scary for you.
Three months into therapy, and at last there's a substantial breakthrough. For the first time, she allows herself to be comforted by Sue.
Luckily, she gets better.
She got better. She came out of hospital.
Because I really felt for Sue, because there was Maisie being very sad about, you know, another mum, I guess, and she still got up and wanted to get close to Maisie.
I think that's the first time that she has appropriately cried.
And you went to stay back with her.
And it's really hard for them to actually be scared and vulnerable and cry. So Maisie is making quite big steps in many ways to be able to manage that.
Okay, so in that one you see how important it was that she actually allowed her attachment figure, her adoptive mum, prospective adoptive mum, to get close to her and comfort her, and that nobody had ever explained. Her foster mum, Susan, had collapsed. An ambulance had come and had taken her to hospital, but nobody had ever, and then she was moved, but nobody had ever explained what had happened, that that wasn't her fault because of all the physical violence she'd been causing. So she was left with a lot of confusion and fears, and still a wish to go back. So it was a big breakthrough in the therapy work that actually she'd allowed us to tell her the story, that she'd actually heard the bit that Susan got better and is okay and is going to see her again from time to time, and that she actually allowed her mum to comfort her. Normally she would not let Sue anywhere near her, but in this first time she actually allowed Sue to get close. Now the next bit you're going to see, and it's just a little snippet, is a therapy session sometime later on when she allows us to talk about the violence that went on in the birth family, but she'd asked for the camera to be switched off, as you'll see. At this point, the
Who
camera
else has
stopped
got
filming.
physically hurt?
One second.
Beaten up, Maisie? No?
I think you have, love.
You might not
I
remember.
really think you have.
It's a long time ago.
When?
Well, we're aware there was a lot of violence, and that was what ultimately got you all taken into care.
I'm sorry, that was so sad.
No. I'm sorry, but I have not been the one that's attacked you or your brothers or your mum or your dad or anybody.
What did you have to tell me about?
Oh, well, I did ask Sue to
Because
say.
it's true.
Because you had such a terrifying time. To see your mum beaten up so badly that you children were trying to intervene to stop her getting hurt, and to see your brothers beaten up. It was just awful, terrifying for you.
Did you just have bruises? Oh, what happened?
They certainly got punched and hit.
And I think every time you hurt Sue and you kick and you bite her and you punch and you headbutt her, you're doing the stuff that you've seen. I thought it was very powerful hearing her history a bit, Sue and Jim talking out that, and how distressed she was by hearing about the horrific abuse that went on, the physical abuse.
Well done, you did really well, Maisie.
And she had masses of questions. I think we could have gone on and on.
But actually, I think what she's flagging up is, you know, I want to do the harder stuff, really, isn't it?
She was so interested in her story. And maybe, I hope, maybe beginning to think of some connection between seeing her brothers beaten up, seeing her birth mum beaten up, and the sort of beating up that she does of Sue.
Today's session is upsetting, but it's a breakthrough. And it seems to have a real impact on Maisie. She keeps talking about what happened on the way home. In their parent...
Okay, and the last little video is where things get to. So it was really very significant that she allowed us to talk about the violence that went on, the violence she saw up until the age of 4 in her birth family. It did improve things at home. It's no miracle cure, and talking, as I was saying earlier, it's not just about talking, but it did make a big difference to the whole family understanding about the violence that they were living with in the adoptive home. And things did improve and settle, and she engaged really with wanting to be adopted. She sat with her adoptive parents and they filled in the papers together for her to get adopted. And then this is the adoption day, and you'll see a difference in the way things are.
It's the 23rd of November. Maisie's wished for this day, but never really dreamt it would happen. All the children remember the moment they were adopted into this extraordinary family.
The only question the judge asked us was, do you want to get adopted or not? We were like, yeah, please. The answer was yes, wasn't it, Slug? I knew you'd say that.
The judge gave us a little teddy bear. I still have mine.
He was like, I now declare you adopted. No, he didn't. I know, I'm joking. Let's go to the car!
Hold on.
Look how Lewis this way.
Come on. It's permanent. She's one of ours now. So it's the beginning of the rest of her life and our life with her. It's marking how far Maisie's got. That she's achieved this amount of stability and that she definitely wants to stay.
Daddy, castle.
You all right to sit on the end? Right.
We've made a good start. We've engaged with her. She knows this is her family, so she can start to learn about herself and deal with her past from a safe position. It's a long, long way to go. I reckon we've reached the 3rd or 4th rung of a 25-foot ladder. Here is a toast to the smallest family in the world, not quite, and its newest member, Maisie. Cheers.
Cheers.
Hey.
this is a child who deserves to have a family, a childhood, and have fun. There you go.
Cheers, Maisie Days. Love you lots.
Hang on, let me come to you.
So that was why we took her.
This is...
Okay, and you see how she goes down. She says, let me come to you, and she goes with her glass and clinks glasses. I mean, nothing straightforward. She continues to have her struggle, but these are now still her parents, and they're all working together, and she's made incredibly good progress at secondary school. You've just seen a snippet, really, here of what's possible and how important it is to find a way to say the unsayable, to find a way to communicate with children about what really can very easily never get mentioned, and how much work that takes for the whole family, not just for the child, but everyone needs to work together. Now, I'm going to just end. You'll see the references here for the research on this flyer, which you'll find on our website. And the last quote I was going to say is from a psychiatrist in America called Bruce Perry, which I thought was very relevant to this conference. And what he says is that he urges that innovative creative practices are recognized as modern versions of the most effective, time-honored and biologically respectful therapeutic practices created by our ancestors. He says that there is a pressure for evidence-based practice, but we should remind ourselves that the most powerful evidence is that which comes from hundreds of separate cultures across thousands of generations, independently converging on rhythm, touch, storytelling, and reconnection to community as the core ingredients to coping with and healing from trauma. Okay, thank you very much.
Esto es todo, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Jay, for showing us so clearly how all these wounds and scars, the wounds and scars of these children who are doubly vulnerable as they are children, and also because they were born and they were brought up in such a disfavorable environment. Thank you for sharing us how we can help them overcome that situation and go back into a safety environment where they can develop and where they can grow as with their whole potential, with their full potential. Maybe we could have 2 or 3 questions or reflections from the audience. This is a question. First, I'd like to congratulate you for your work. And of course, it makes me think about so many things when I listen to you, because these children, my impression is that I think they have suffered double violence, the violence in their families of origin, but also the violence of going through 3 or 4 families until they reach a family or they get to a family that keeps them. And I think that the story that you're telling us, we are familiar with these situations here too, but for me this is a terrible situation and it shows a failure of the system. But we were quite surprised to see this video of this girl advertising for adoption. This is something that our system would never allow for. This is not present in our system, and I wanted you to explain a little bit about this, because today in the afternoon, after the morning session, some of us were saying, oh, but the girl was telling what she's like, what she likes, etc. That was shocking for us.
For children like Maisie, who was 6, I think we've reached a sort of pragmatic decision that unless prospective adopters can really get to know the child that they might be taking on, it is a blind date of a very high-risk strategy. So as a consequence, adopters who might have taken on a child like Maisie walk away and leave children like Maisie in foster care. We've even gone one step further in that rather than just videos of children, which aren't freely given on the internet, they are given to serious, approved adoptive parents who are looking for a child. There are days, activity days, where 6 prospective adoptive parents will meet, say, 6 or 8 children and spend time with them. Because what they found is that where parents, prospective parents and children actually meet face to face, there's a much higher matching and connection between parents and children. So some people say, well, it's very difficult for the child to meet people who are looking at them. It's a cattle market. On the other hand, it's an opportunity for adopters to meet the real child and not just see a photograph and a description on paper. So I think, obviously, we've thought long and hard about this, but for older and what we call harder to place children because of their age and complex backgrounds, it's an opportunity for prospective adopters to really click or not with this child, rather than sign up on paper for a child they will only meet after it's all been agreed and there's very little chance of backing out. I hope that answers your question. But I know it's controversial, but that's what we do and why we do it.
Buenas tardes, gracias a la señora.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the speakers. Thank you very much for those videos. I think that it was very accurate and it was wonderful to see. I also have a question. I wanted to ask you whether in that family they have other children, they had other children, boys and girls. Did you have any problems, not only in Maisie's case, that other adoptive parents had children already and that they had to share the parents with this new child, that there is a new child going into that home, the other children don't know anything about them, there's some rivalry, there's some rejection, or are they accepted? What kind of behaviors also do you get from the parents, or in what kind of position are they in? Because do you have any psychologists also working with them, with the other children?
We do very thorough psychological profiles of prospective adopters, and if they have biological children in their family already, or other adopted children, a psychologist and a therapist will do an assessment of those children and whether we think they are capable of tolerating another child coming into the family. The normal protocol is that we don't place adopted children into families that have pre-existing children. This family was very unusual, and they were chosen because of their experience. But in most cases, a childless couple, or some of our most successful placements have been single women. In London, we have a lot of single women coming forward who want to adopt a child, and they have been very, very successful.
I should also say this is a very unusual family. I think to place a child with that many children already in the family, all of whom are adopted, all of whom have their own issues, is a big deal. We did do work with the other children in the family, and there were points when the other children were really struggling with Maisie's aggressive behaviour to their mum. So we did have to intervene and help them all think about it. And actually all the children were interviewed again prior to the adoption actually going through. And they all said that Maisie had changed significantly, and they felt life at home for the whole family was so much better now, and they were all signing up as a family that they really wanted Maisie in their family. But I don't think it would ever be straightforward to place a child with Maisie's history. I think one has to question why, but it happened, and we were asked to help out once that she'd already been there and was in difficulties.
Very good, very passionate presentation, and I would like to ask you which kind of family, according to British legislation, can adopt children, can take children? Okay.
I mean, there are no real prescriptions. We have single women, occasionally single men, gay and lesbian couples, heterosexual couples, sometimes families who've had their own children or adopted before. It's about capacity to parent, and our assessment of prospective adopters is about their capacity to parent and not judging some demographic. There are no strict age boundaries. On the upper limit, it's more about the health and well-being of the prospective adopter. Or if there's an age gap between one partner and the other, we would work it on the younger parents' age and health. But it is about health. It's not unusual for 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds? No, I think mainly 40-year-olds on average. Because in England the demographic again is people put off having children until they're 30-something, and then they find they can't for whatever reason. By the time they've gone through this process of assessment, they're in their early, they're nearly in their 40s.
I would just like to tell you that I'm shocked by the video. I'm still impressed by it. And I can't understand how in a conference of this kind, I'm not sure whether this video is appropriate for a conference from an ethical perspective. Maybe it has to do with culture or political differences between the UK and Spain. At least in Asturias, we rarely get to see a child in a video and speaking about her as, or describing her as a violent person. I'm not sure. This is not a question. It's just something that it just struck me as different, and I just wanted to share it with you.
Ethical process.
I absolutely agree. I mean, I have a number of children and families I've worked with over the years who sometimes give their permission, but I always feel a bit uncomfortable sharing very personal bits of therapy. For me, this video is easier to share because it went through such a long ethical process and so many different panels in order for the BBC to be allowed to film it. So I feel more comfortable than I might be sharing it because it's been on television in the UK. And because it's been through this ethical process, and because I know that Maisie and her parents have agreed to this, and various lawyers have been through a whole load of procedures, it is easy to share, but it's still very personal material. I know that you can probably access it via the internet, but I suppose with anything as personal as this, I can only ask that you treat with respect what she has shared and what her parents have shared. But I do agree, it's complicated. It's good to be able to share it with you, but it does raise issues. Yeah.
I think that from the legislation that we have in Spain in terms of protection of children's image and dignity, we should have had approval by a prosecutor. It's the prosecutor for minors who has to allow for the dissemination of videos such as this one. But here we also have to think about the benefit that we can get from seeing the video in order to help us understand the difficulties that are being lived by these children and how through a process of therapy we can overcome those difficulties. But of course, yes, for us it's a controversial matter, I agree. And whether these images are in line with the concept of the dignity of minors, and that's what we always need to keep in mind. We always need to think what is the highest gain, or what is the highest benefit for the child. If you do not have any further questions, okay, one last question or comment. I just wanted to go back to what the previous speaker said. I am also in shock still after seeing the video, but I wanted to say that I'm happy that we live in a country where this is not possible, because Spanish legislation protects children from these situations of exposure, and I am very happy that we are in this kind of framework. And this video is a way of... I'm not criticizing your therapeutic approach at all. I don't want to be understood as such. But for me, this video is also part of capitalism. Maybe in the UK, where a child is seen as a product and has to be sold as if it was some shampoo. So I think it's terrible that they have to go through that. And I think that maybe in the future she will need more therapy, because for me it's a triple victimization of the child. And in our country, that from a professional perspective, for a lot of people, that would be a real scandal. We could never do that. Broadcasting Corporation couldn't do that. And in the UK, you also have social services protecting children. I'm amazed that a TV station could do this.
To give a child a voice, and for that voice to be heard, so that you understand the impact that domestic violence has on children. Because secrecy amongst adults is one thing, but the most inhibited, the most shut down voice is the voice of the child.
Yes, I totally agree with that the voice of children needs to be heard. But when we're trying to see how children have to speak, we have to remember that the mothers and fathers do never choose their own children. They do not choose their own children. They cannot send them back anywhere. And that's why I mean that maybe a child, when we are adopting, they have to understand that being a father or mother is a complex thing, and that children have their own personalities and issues always. Okay, thank you. Okay, I think that this is an interesting debate. We can continue thinking about this. And of course, we have many steps to take from all sorts of perspectives, from a personal approach, families, the legislation, institutions, to see that boys and girls are not instrumentalized, and that we are always working for their well-being, and so that all these vulnerable children can really recover from the wounds and from their trauma and develop their potential. Thank you.